vast multiverse.
Aloha! Welcome to today's presentation. We're going to be talking about the medieval times, the Dark Ages. Now, the Dark Ages are of particular interest to me. What a strange time. What a strange time in history that seems to have just been swept under the rug. You know, in modern academics, whenever people mention the Dark Ages or they teach us about the Dark Ages, that's on average an entire 1,000 years of history that basically has just been erased. And we're supposed to just think that there weren't many records that made it through that time for some unknown reason. It really focuses on Europe and European history, if you know what history has passed down to us. They don't really tell us about the different annals and the records and chronicles of various people that wrote down strange things that happened. We've talked about the maps many times here on my channel that have survived, and we have many ancient maps from the medieval times, and those maps portray some really interesting and strange things on them. For example, sea monsters and phantom islands and things of that nature. So I really wanted to dive into the concept of there having been a reset. An event that happened worldwide, the world across, to change our world, to change history as it was known up until that point in time. Now, when the Dark Ages officially began, when the medieval times began, there's a lot of debate amongst historians and amongst academics and even independent researchers, but we can all agree that there was some sort of a span of time, approximately 1,000 years, where things abruptly changed, and they became more, they slipped into more of a legend and myth than they did actual history. And whenever we look back to those times, they seem legendary. They seem mythic. These are where so many of our actual myths and legends came from, at the very least here in the United States, and in England and whatnot. We have the legends of King Arthur and things of that nature, Excalibur and stuff. So we're going to jump into that. What's up, everybody in the live stream? Good to see everybody. Give me a thumbs up. Thank you, Mary Soul. I appreciate you. If you can hear, okay. Hold on. Chassis. Chassis says, I hate commercials. Listen, every time I see in the comments that somebody says something about the commercials, those commercials helped me to feed my son and my dog, and they helped me to pay my rent and have all the lights and equipment that I have to run my YouTube channel. So if you appreciate my work, then please just take it with a grain of salt. You know, if you can skip them and you'd like to, go ahead. If not, please remember, without those, I wouldn't be doing this and we wouldn't be here right now. So it's, you know, I'm not a fan of commercials either, but I have bills that I got to pay as a single father that lives by myself in Colorado. And, you know, I got stuff I got to pay for, like, you know, gas and just necessities and stuff. So I appreciate it if you guys don't mind that. At the very least, please don't comment about it. If you don't like it, please try to be positive in the chat and contribute to the conversation. And with that being said, let's talk about today's presentation. I'm going to pull up some notes that I have on the subject. A few things that I'm going to go over with this presentation here. And I appreciate all you guys in the chat. Thank you for the thumbs up, everybody, too. I appreciate that. Mysteries of the Serpent, says Frank the Tank. Yes, we're going to talk about the serpents. Wonderful serpents, as they're sometimes described. Oftentimes they're described as fiery serpents, and we'll get to those dragons and stuff too. But I thought it'd be a good place to start with the etymology, the root of the origin of the word medieval. What does medieval mean, right? So I like to study etymology. I feel like it really is a good breadcrumb. It's a good puzzle piece to sort of lay a foundation for what it is that we're discussing and looking at. So when we take a look at the word medieval, here's what I have found through my etymological studies of the word. It comes from Latin, meaning the first part of the word means medium, and it means the middle. And then the second part comes from the word avum, or age. Now, avum comes from the Proto-Indo-European root word aiw, which means or implies a vital force, life, long life, and eternity. But even that word eternity, whenever I do my studies on it, does not imply forever without end. It implies for a long period of time. And oftentimes I found that those long periods of time, those long stretches of time, are from apocalypse to apocalypse, from cataclysm to cataclysm, from reset to reset. Those to me are ages. Those to me are eons. Okay? So I'm sharing my personal studies with you and my viewpoint on the subject. Now, it means medium or middle, and then avum, which means vital force. Now, if we look up the word avum, it says here a temporal. Temporal means earthly, but with a focus on temporarily lasting, right? So the second part of medieval, or the evil part, doesn't mean evil as in good versus evil. I've actually found that it's probably quite the opposite for the Dark Ages. This word avum means temporal, from a temporal form of existence said to be experienced by angels, saints, and celestial bodies. Temporal, meaning lasting only for a time, a measure, a measured out amount of time, a stretch of time, and also a season of time. Not as in our 4 seasons that we have, but a long-lasting period of time, right? So this is interesting. Let's take a look at the word medium, as in Middle Ages or medium ages, right? Middle, it means, but also a secondary sense of intervening substance through which a force or a quality is conveyed, channeling, often via the air or airways. It's where the word media comes from. Media is just a plural form of the word medium, right? So you think of like mediums, like psychic mediums and whatnot. They are, the medium is through the airways, basically. It travels through the airways. They act as a mediary between ghosts or whatever, spirits and stuff, God and goddesses, and humans as well. So if we take a look at the word, it means, it could be interpreted to mean medieval, could be interpreted to mean the medium of vital force, or a medium for a vital force. Not just the middle time during a certain unknown time in history, but a time where there was a medium of a vital force, or a channeling of a vital force. What's that vital force? If you watch my channel, we talk about it all the time. It's plasma. It's electromagnetism. And there are times that our Earth charges that electromagnetism and it pulls it in deep within the bowels of the Earth, or Hades, or the underworld. And then, after another time or age, it releases it. And we have terrestrial beams of ionized gas bursting forth throughout cavernous systems across the world, creating pillars in the sky and what are interpreted as swords of light, or beanstalks, or columns and whatnot, right? So that is basically the etymology of the word medieval. Now, I also want to talk about the word tempest as well. Since we were talking about temporal, it reminded me of the word tempest. Now, today, in today's world, language evolves or devolves over time. So words tend to lose their original meaning. Why would a tempest, or a violent storm, as it's defined, a violent windstorm, be named after a word that means temporal or time, right? It could be, to me, that the word tempest is not to be used lightly or loosely, as in just describing, we went through a tempest the other day. No, you didn't. Okay? Okay, a tempest is a worldwide storm. It is the storm. It is the perfect storm. It is a millennial maelstrom. This is an event that happens once in a blue moon. Okay, and it's a time storm. It's a storm that changes the times that we live in, how we experience time, and the actual times and ages and eons, because we're actually going from one eon and one age to another one. And there's oftentimes a tempest associated with that, or a world storm. All right, so let's start on some other topics here at the beginning. Hold on one second. Okay. Now, the first thing I want to talk, I want to point out all these strange anomalies that have that are associated with the Dark Ages and the medieval times. The things that really define these times, right? And bring them to light, because many of these anomalies were normal for that particular time period. It wasn't unexpected to hear about these particular things that happened. The first one that we'll talk about is known as the Dancing Plague. An actual plague, or a sickness that happened in many different regions across the world, not just in Europe, but in many places. And it started from about the 7th century AD and lasted all the way throughout the 14th century and beyond. But between that time period of the 7th century to the 14th century, there were many different instances of this mass hysteria known as the Dancing Plague. From town to town and region to region, every so often, people all around their towns and villages and stuff, many people would just start dancing for no reason whatsoever, as if they couldn't control it. And they would dance so much that they would dance until they collapsed or died. They would die dancing. This has also happened afterwards. This has happened in modern times as well, in little pockets of areas. The most recent one I can remember happened in Africa. But this is directly associated with the plasma apocalypse, as I talk about it here on my channel, because we discuss the release of gas and all of these earthly gases that are created and being pressurized down below. Whenever that pressure is released, all of those gases come up. Now, many times they ionize and they turn into those beams, as I said, but when they don't ionize, they just leak out in the forms of gases. And those gases can pool about into valleys and different places where they can go through towns and villages, and depending upon the type of gas that it is, it'll have different effects on people. Some gases will give you what they call the jitterbug. It'll cause spasms, and it'll cause people to start shaking and look like they can't move their, it messes up your motor functions, basically. And I believe that this is what caused and does cause many of these dancing plagues. It also reminds me of a Monty Python skit, right? I don't know if you guys know who Monty Python is, right? This comedy troupe in the UK. I grew up watching Monty Python, and they had this really funny skit about the funniest joke in the world, right? And whenever somebody read this joke, they would laugh so hard that they would die. And then I started seeing this theme of laughing so hard that you die, and all these people laughing so hard that they die. Roger Rabbit comes to mind. It's one of the very first ones, classic one, where the weasels, that's the only way to really kill them is to have them laugh to death. But this can also happen through gases. Nitrous oxide is one of those gases that can cause people to just abruptly start laughing uncontrollably. They don't want to laugh. And there's been many instances of laughing plagues as well, where people laughed so hard that their stomachs started to hurt and they were crying and whatnot, but they were laughing. So these are different examples of how gases can be released from the earth, and how they were released from the earth during these medieval times. And it's not just, gases seeping out of the earth. There were magnificent explosions in different forms as well. The most notable of these are volcanic explosions, massive volcanic explosions, whenever all those gases are released. Now, keep in mind, sometimes the firmament above us, the the actual physical barrier between us and the heavens, or us and what I call the fractal verse. Sometimes it opens during these cataclysms. Sometimes it does not open during these cataclysms. But if it doesn't open and you have all these gases being that's going to contribute to the pressure that eventually is going to cause the firmament to bust open whenever all that pressure rushes up to the apex of the dome. And then that will also have its own implications, and that'll knock over different dominoes. All right, so let's see. I think, you know what, at the end of this, if this is a quicker presentation, I'll do a question and answer segment, and I'll jump into the chat with you guys. So if you have questions, start thinking of them now, and I'll come back to you guys. Next up, in the early 7th century, there's a story of the prophet named Muhammad, who got his visions within a cave, which is also very interesting because cavernous systems tended to be those places that released these deep earth gases, right? So the Oracle of Delphi, Muhammad, and many others were cave oracles, cave prophets. Even Merlin himself was said to get much of his wisdom from a cave that probably led down into the hollow recesses of our world. So, what happens is whenever those gases become ionized is they become electrified, and they carry the knowledge of the world, or the Akashic records, or the information from the halls of Amenti, and so on and so forth. So people have visions, not just that they're hallucinating, but they have earthly visions. Information is being conveyed and passed on to them as their very auras become amplified. And it works just like how telepathy works, except for you're sharing a telepathic ability with Mother Nature and with the earth herself. Now, in the 7th century, this is when, and the 7th century would actually be like 100 years before 700, so it's in the 600s, right? The Prophet Muhammad, there's a story of him splitting the moon, or proving the divinity of his God by calling upon his God to have the moon split into half, into two pieces. And the story, there's different accounts of the story, but in many of those accounts, it says that the moon was split, and between the two pieces of the moon was seen his sacred mountain, one of the many sacred mountains of the Muslims, called Jabal Qubays. Qubays, also called the Mountain of Light. Now, that's especially interesting to me because I put forth the theory of plasma volcanoes. Whenever the volcanoes of the world emit or shoot out all of those ionized gases, and they create pillars and beams of light that reach up to the firmament and seem to be holding up the heavens and keeping the heavens from falling down upon us, right? Those are the mountains of light, mountains that actually emitted light. I'm not talking about burning lava or subtly glowing magma or anything like that. I'm talking about mountains that bursted forth beams of light. These were beacons. These were pillars. They were rods, or rood, as they were called in the medieval times, in England at least. Now, in 1178, many years later, we have another account of a strange happening with the moon appearing to split in the sky. 5 monks in Canterbury, England, witnessed the upper horn of the moon splitting into two. It writhed. Now, this is a direct quote from a witness. Oh, I lost my place. Hold on one sec. Damn, where was I? I hate it when I click on the wrong thing. My bad. Okay, here we go. Now, the quote says that the moon writhed, or sort of looked to be wriggling, right? Which also reminds me of the lunar wave phenomenon. It writhed as it were in anxiety, throbbing like a wounded snake. A flaming torch also appeared from the midpoint of the split, spewing out fire, hot coals, and sparks. This happened a dozen times as these witnesses looked on at the moon, couldn't take their eyes off of it, I imagine, and watched as these weird, strange, and anomalous things were happening with this luminary up there in the heavens, as it appeared to break in half and light and sparks were coming out of it. This was chronicled by a man named Gervase of Canterbury. He also says afterward, when it was finished, it came back together and resumed its proper state. The moon broke apart, had electricity, looks like it was bursting forth from it, as I interpret it, and then it sealed itself back up together. And this was also during the medieval times. People saw weird things like this quite often. If you look up the records, modern academics tends to gloss over these types of instances, but I find the more that I study and research the medieval times, the Dark Ages, the more weird and strange things exactly like the moon splitting that I tend to find. It seems to be commonplace during those times. Hey, Jake Davis Music gave me a donation in the chat. Thank you. I appreciate the super chat. Says, thanks for all your work. You're super welcome. All right, let's continue on. Let's see. Next up, we're going to talk about yellow, black, and red dust that rained down from the skies, often forming itself into large piles and mounds. This is another strange thing that I see happen from country to country across this period of the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, where it just seemed to be normal or unexpected for dust and sand or even rocks to rain down and fall down from the heavens. Sometimes you'll see in the pictures off here to the side, these are some examples, just some visuals for you guys to think about. People have drawn, and I'm not talking about like a meteor shower. I'm talking about actual desert sand seems to be falling down onto the people, right? And in different colors as well. Now, keep in mind, in order for those gases to emit out of plasma volcanoes or out of cavernous systems or whatnot, they have to unplug them. They have to get rid of all of that lava and all of that debris and stuff, which means there's going to be explosions and stuff. And if there is no atmospheric depressurization, as happens with the apocalypse, the large ones like the deluge and the coming one of fire, those actually get rid of all of the smoke and soot and debris and whatnot. But whenever you don't have a large atmospheric depressurization to cleanse the world of it, then all that stuff will just stay in a closed system, which is the world that we live in this realm. Now, another thing that can also cause large amounts of dust and debris are the cosmic thunderbolts from above that strike down. Now, I believe that during the Dark Ages, it wasn't actually dark. That it was actually, I mean, it was dark compared to today, like having a point of focus that we call the sun shine down extremely bright on top of us, but there was ambient light all over the place. If in fact there were terrestrial beams of energy that were shooting up in various places, around those places it would be light and bright, and so people tended to flock towards these pillars and poles and natural beams of light that came up out of the earth, or other places that would provide light as well. But in between those places, it would be much darker, obviously. But whenever you have electrical discharge, cosmic electrical discharge, it can blow the rock out and disintegrate it. Not rocks and comets or any of that stuff hitting the earth and it's like the dinosaurs dying off and a fireball engulfs the earth. Nothing cartoonified like that, but actual electricity that's built up and becomes electrical discharge to zap the surface and blow up all of the debris and gravel and soil and stuff, right? And it creates sand. It can also create glass as well. Whenever it hits sand and things like that, it can turn it into glass. Now, next up, we also have different accounts of red rain or blood rain. So, during the Dark Ages, you may have noticed, anytime you've ever watched anything about the Dark Ages, even if they don't directly tell you it was a foggy time, it was a misty time, they will show this to you, especially in the movies and fantasy. I am a firm believer that there is truth in fantasy and truth in fiction and truth in sci-fi and truth in the movies. I have a whole segment on my channel where we actually decode and break down the movies every week, because I find that the movies hold more truths for me personally than your nightly news. And so I study them. I study the movies. I mean, I like to just enjoy and kick back and watch them too, but I also get a lot out of them. And then I research them as well. I don't just say, oh, well, that feels right to me. I stop what I'm doing quite often and I go look things up and I research them. So oftentimes it'll take me a very long time to actually watch a movie. Let's see what else. The dust that happens during these times, it combines with a very vaporous atmosphere, and rain and low pressure systems and whatnot, especially if you do have depressurization of any form, it's going to create fog and mist, and it's going to create low pressure systems, and therefore clouds and whatnot. Now, during the Dark Ages, they did have a lot of fog and mist and stuff, and it is actually described. It's just that so many people gloss over it. Anyways, so the dust and whatnot mixes with that, and obviously you get red rain, yellow rain, different colors of rain, and there have been different colors of rain. It's rained down weird and strange things in the past. It's rained down animals. It has rained down fish. It has rained down rocks. It has rained down gold and coins and silver and all kinds of strange things, snakes and all. I mean, weird stuff falls out of the sky all the time. It's just that it's not usually mentioned in the modern world. It's just glossed over. Let's see, what else? In 536, in the year 536, this is all going to be AD. Now, also keep this in mind. I have found, personally, and many others, it seems, have also found that our calendars are all messed up. Our calendrical systems, our ways of keeping track of time seem to have been manipulated purposefully by the system that controls us and has controlled us, stretching all the way down from after the time period that we're talking about, the Dark Ages and Middle Ages, during the Enlightenment and all these other subsequent ages, which are what I call the season of Satan, but we'll finish up with that actually. It's very possible that a 1,000-year chunk of time had been added to our history immediately after the Dark Ages, and it's also possible that an extra 300 years were added in order to justify the reign of a particular pope that was in charge in the past. So that's 1,300 years. And there's strong evidence. I mean, I'm compelled by what I've seen as far as people adding time to the calendar. They definitely added 11 to 13 days, depending on what country you live in, to the calendar, and they will readily admit that. So it's hard to trust any of the calendars, any of the historic numbers, and the exact years. That's why I'll be speaking about the Dark Ages in approximate times, okay? Let's see what else. Now, also keep in mind too, I didn't write this in my notes, but you know, I've got different things on my mind as I speak. While the Dark Ages were happening in medieval Europe, and they were sort of glossed over and portrayed as a time when people just lived in the mud, which is also an interesting topic to discuss. In Islam, they were having a golden age at the beginning of this time period. Everything was wonderful. Everything was great. They were excelling in learning and in the sciences and prospering in peace. And it was quite the golden age. It's actually called the Islamic Golden Age. Now, in 536, much of the world went dark for 18 months in a mysterious fog that rolled over Europe, the Middle East. Damn, I just clicked on that again. I gotta stop clicking on stuff. A mysterious fog rolled over Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. The fog blocked out the sun on 3 continents. Fog. Now, if you look this up, oftentimes they will change that word and they'll say, oh, well, yeah, when they said fog, they just meant ash because there must have been, and then they start making things up. They start assuming, oh, yeah, it must have been that one volcano that covered the entire earth in ash and darkened the entire earth for 18 months. However, many of the actual records say it was fog. They say it was a mist that rolled in. Just like the movie The Mist, which we broke that movie down before, but I had to take it, I think I took it down from my playlist because I had technical difficulties. So we're going to we're going to decode The Mist by Stephen King. What's today, Saturday? We're going to do that Sunday. So, yeah, today's Friday. So whatever, I don't know what day it is. This Sunday, we're going to decode The Mist once more. I watched it just last night with my son, and wow, I got more stuff out of it. Anyways, so all the stuff that happens is very much like in the movie The Mist. I'll talk about monsters, phantazoids, mutants, and other things as well that happened during the Dark Ages. But you have this rolling fog and this mist that covered 3 continents so densely that it blotted out the sun, that it became dark. up above, right? According to the ancient writings. Now, in 1119, the year 1119, 3 suns were seen in the sky in several parts of Europe. Now, this is not uncommon for the Dark Ages, for people to see multiple luminaries up in the sky, or the luminaries acting erratically and changing their paths or changing color or doing all sorts of weird things that would blow people's minds if it happened in the modern world. So, for example, in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, we read that 2 moons were seen in the night. This was in the year 1106 AD. People witnessed 2 moons. And it's not like it was some optical effect and the moons were right next to each other. One moon was on the west and one moon was in the east. This was a strange event that was recorded by the monks who swore their oaths to God and kings and other people to accurately write down the histories, which were ultimately collected from each monastery and turned into the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. Another example of strange, celestial, anomalous events, weird things, lights that were seen in the sky, so large that multiple communities across countries witnessed them, were a sword of light. There was a sword, or what looked like a sword, or a column that branched out at the top of light that was seen in the sky as heavenly chariots and entities seemed to fight one another at the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, there's a few different records of this. The most famous one was brought to us or passed down by Josephus, the Jewish historian. And he recorded many weird things that happened around that time, which I also don't believe that it was the actual modern day Israel or Jerusalem where it is located now. I believe that there is a quintessential Jerusalem which is located at the North Pole, and I believe that many of these stories actually happened there, and then those inhabitants fled and they settled or became nomadic and settled to other parts of the world and renamed those places after their homelands. And they brought with them their histories and whatnot as well. A sword of light was seen in the sky, a heavenly sword of light that rested above the city, exactly as people see described and drawn whenever people draw the nativity scene and the birth of Jesus, the light of the world. They always have that one star that has an extremely long tail that seems to just touch the earth. It's because that light is not coming from above and traveling downward. That light is terrestrial, shooting upwards into the heavens and then branching out in this light pillar in the sky. Now, another thing that we have during the medieval times was the dancing sun that was seen in Ireland in the year 1040. The sun was seen by many people, and it was described as having danced about for hours upon end, similar to the miracle of Fatima. And the people described the sun as having moved erratically, and you can imagine how people felt when they saw that. Imagine if that were to happen today, right? Now, what causes it to do that? There's, I would speculate, but I believe that, I don't believe the modern academic theory of the sun being as large as they say it is, what they say it is, where it's located, or any of that. I have an ancient cosmological viewpoint that I share with my ancestors and forefathers. The majority belief when it comes to our cosmology across time, when considering all of time. The modern belief is the minority belief when it comes to space and, we're following after this fireball and whatnot. I like the ancient Phoenician and Hebrew concepts of our cosmology, right? So if you look at things like that, the sun is located under the dome within this realm. It's in here with us. And what causes it is the plasma on the other side of the ice, which is above us, that passes through that. And it can be manipulated based on the plasma currents that are swirling around and spiraling around the dome above us. Especially whenever they hit anomalies and stuff, that can cause comets and other optical effects up in our sky. Shane Murphy, hey, welcome to my channel. Thanks for joining us. High five. All right, cool. What else? What was I talking about? The sun acting weird? Yeah, the sun's done all kinds of weird stuff across time. Right now, we're just focusing on the Middle Ages. If you think about the day the sun stopped from, the Old Testament in the days of Joshua, the only way that could happen in academics is if all of a sudden the Earth just suddenly stopped rotating, which would throw everything on the surface off into space. So I'm not a fan of that whole theory. Let's see. Next up. There were approximately 12 different supernovas that were seen with the naked eye during the medieval times. Supernovas, just explosions happening with stars or lights that look like they're exploding or whatever, glowing and giving off this explosion appearance up there in the heavens. 12 different ones. That's pretty amazing. I've never seen a supernova myself. I would remember if I had. I think that's quite a thing to happen. 12 times during this particular time. Lots of strange things happening up there in the heavens. Also, in the year 806 AD, a cross was seen in the moon. Right? Now, this is not the only time. There's also, who was it? Constantine? That saw a cross in the sun, right? He looked up and there was an X, or a cross, they call it, right? We associate the X shape with the cruciform that has an elongated bottom or whatever, but it's really just an X, okay? And the reason for that is because of those 4 rivers that lie at paradise, right? Those are reflected by what the Anglo-Saxons called the Velcon, or the Welkin, which is just an old English word for the firmament, basically. The firmament reflecting our world back to us. And the firmament is also responsible for creating the projections and the points of focus we see in the sky that we call the moon and the sun. So it makes sense to me that occasionally people see a cross or an X up there in the sun or in the moon. And this happened in the year AD 806. A cross was seen in the moon, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. Also, I'm just going to stay with the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles for a moment because it's an excellent source of history during this particular medieval times. A bloody Velcon firmament was in the likeness of fire, shown in misty beams, kind of like how you see here. A bloody Velcon, that means a blood-red heavens, a blood-red sky. This is not describing some mundane event that happens all the time, like sunrise or sunset. I don't also believe that this is, describing like a local region, that was affected by a volcano or anything. I can't say exactly what it was, but I do know that we go through color transitions in the world that we live in. We go through a change in our color spectrum. The actual light from above changes color. The sun itself is changing color constantly and always. It used to be more of a yellow, right? Many of us can actually remember the sun being yellow. And then before that was more of a yellowy orange, and before that more orange, and before that more red. And right now it's blindingly white with a dash of blue. Pretty soon it will move more into the blue spectrum as it gets hotter and hotter and heats up the world and then starts burning things. But let's get back to the Middle Ages. A bloody Velcon in the likeness of fire, shown in misty beams. So there's that mist again, and then you have those beams, those light pillars that shined, in various locations across the world. 1122 AD, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles says this: after this time, there were many shipmen out on the sea and fresh water. And these shipmen said that they saw on the northeast, level with the earth, a fire, huge and broad, which then waxed, which means got bigger, in length, up to the Velcon. So they saw, these shipgoers looked across towards the north, and they saw this light that grew up from the ground and went straight up to what appeared to be the heavens. Let me read that again. After this, there were many shipmen out at the sea. This was in 1122 AD. Out on the fresh water, and they said when they looked to the north, level with the earth, they saw a fire huge and broad, which waxed in its length up to the firmament. And the firmament undid itself in 4 parts and fought against it. So the firmament, the heavens, appeared to fight against this beam of light that shot up into the heavens, as if it would quench it, and the fire waxed nevertheless up to heaven. The fire they saw in the day dawn, and it lasted until it was light over everything. Now this is an extremely important record for me personally of these plasma beams that shoot up from plasma openings or plasma volcanoes, cavernous openings in the earth, ionized gases that are being released at ridiculous speeds, causing them to ionize and to become plasmas. And it shoots up into the sky, all the way up to what appears to be the firmament up there in the heavens. So that's extremely interesting to me. Next up, we've got the year 774. This also comes from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. This year also appeared in the heavens a red crucifix. Are we seeing a theme of this 4 sections, right? Cruciform, X's, the heavens breaking into 4 different pieces, and so on and so forth, right? Remember, it's reflecting back to us the land that we live on. At the center of our land is paradise, and that's also shown to us. I should have included some of the maps. I don't think I included any of the medieval maps of the land at the North Pole in this particular slideshow behind me. But you can look it up easily for yourself, and I featured it many times here on my channel. A circular land that is cross-sectioned, split into 4 quadrants by 4 rivers. These are the 4 rivers of life that come up out of the world tree, or the plasma volcano, affectionately known as Mount Meru, or Rupus Nigra. All right, next up, we've got, 774. So this year also appeared in the heavens a red crucifix after sunset. The Mercians and the men of Kent fought at Otford, and wonderful serpents were seen in the land of the South Saxons. When they say wonderful serpents, they're not discussing snakes. They're not talking about animals that writhe around on the ground. They're talking about fiery serpents, which are described across time and across religions in many different forms and ways. Sometimes they're described as worms that fly about in the heavens. And so when they were drawn, so that people understood they weren't just worms that were falling down out of the sky, they were given wings. The wings were symbolic to show these worms are flying around in the sky, not falling down or not shooting up into the sky. They're flying about, right? Plasma. These are plasma filaments that undulated about up there in the heavens. In my Omen series, recently, we've been talking about how academics is just now discovering these plasma filaments that they name Steve, which I think is a stupid name for them, but they are plasma filaments. They are the hair of Medusa. They are fire dragons and fireworms. And they go by many different names across time. They are wonderful serpents. They're serpents in the sky that cause wonder. And they're also typically described as fiery serpents. Also, we have in the Book of Lismore, in the year 1480, or 480, depending on how you look at these timelines, multiple references were written to about a fiery pillar and fiery columns rising up from the earth. There's also this interesting poem called The Dream of the Rood, that allegedly the earliest copies that they can trace back go all the way back to the 8th century or the 700s AD. Now I actually posted this entire poem in the community section, one of my first posts. It's still there. You just have to scroll down quite a ways towards the bottom. It's called Dream of the Rood, and it's one of the oldest works of English literature. Do I have that actually pulled up? Let me see if I have that. I don't have it pulled up right now, but this entire poem is a man describing these pillars of light that rose up from the heaven, or rose up to the heavens from the earth. And it's called Rood, not like R-U-D-E, but a rood as in a rod, which is how they said rod back in those times. And it was it was compared to the crucifix of Jesus. And they call it a rod and such as well. Man, I think I'm losing my voice right now. I don't know what's going on. I hope I don't sound weird. I think I sound scratchy. But let's press on. Let's see. What else do we have? Oh, now some other points I want to touch on are the architecture of the Dark Ages. The architecture, the actual buildings that were built during these times, Gothic style buildings, buildings that have huge metallic domes, buildings that have large spires, obelisks, and things of that nature, pointy tops and stuff, right? So I theorized that the atmosphere was electrically amplified due to these pillars and beams and rods and whatnot, and possibly an opening of the firmament. It doesn't have to be an opening of the firmament as well. The fog can also be created by the pressure differential that's caused by the release from these gases. The pressure difference between the inner world or the underworld and the surface world where we live as well can also cause the same types of mist. But anyway, let's see, where was I? Oh, architecture, right? So you'll notice many times, some of these pictures actually show this, that the architecture for the time was magnificent. During a time when it's portrayed as just peasants, making mud pies, or, just random shacks in the forest and things of that nature, poor and lowly villages, we have some of the greatest architectural works ever, and many, and I don't know, most of them that I've seen seem to have survived the test of time. Buildings, just houses, cathedrals, and castles, and large, huge scale structures that were clearly an undertaking. Many of these types of architecture seem to have two different purposes in mind. One of them was protection, and not protection from bands of raiders or villagers or whatnot, although I'm sure that those things existed, but from monsters, from actual cryptids and otherworldly creatures that scared people, large and gigantic, massive, and had sometimes they were described as having otherworldly powers and abilities. These are pictured behind me. There's many of them are featured here in the bestiaries, which is a dictionary from medieval times full of pictures and images where people wrote down the pros and cons of all of these different monsters that were seen and experienced and killed and hunted down by these people. There were actual monster hunters. And this is where I believe many of the elite, their protective classes like the knights and, paladins and other stuff like that. Samurai definitely hunted monsters, in my opinion. They were monster hunters, right? Anyway, so let me get back to the architecture. I'll talk about monsters in a minute. So one purpose for the architecture was to work with the environmental conditions of the time, which was electrically amplified, which means that there was electricity running through the atmosphere to such a strong degree that it affected people's day-to-day lives, how they dressed. They dressed in a manner that protected them from electrical discharge, oftentimes. And we'll get to that in a minute. And how they built their buildings. Sometimes they built their buildings or designed their towns or villages in ways that would prevent electrical discharge so that their towns, their buildings, wouldn't be zapped by cosmic thunderbolts and obliterated like the example that we have in the Old Testament with Lot and Lot's wife and, Sodom and Gomorrah and stuff like that. So they would create these pointy towers. Many of these pointy Gothic style towers and rods and pillars and stuff that had points on them, oftentimes metallic. And what that would do is it would send positively charged energy from the earth up through those pointy metallic rods, and it would dissipate any negative electrical buildup in the area above it, which are what lightning rods are for. Now, in the case that lightning does come down and overcome that positive charge and still hit it, that's whenever modern day lightning rods, and even some of the old world ones, that's when they would actually have a ground that went from the lightning rod. And the purpose of the ground was to redirect the flow of electricity just in case it did hit that particular area, so they can control that flow of electricity. Now, I also believe that many times that ground didn't just go straight down into the earth, but it probably went into underground sections where people may have had the technology to collect that electricity. One second. anyways, so those are rods. So anytime you see this Gothic style architecture where you have towers and pillars and rods and stuff sticking out of buildings, that is to prevent electricity from hitting that area. Now, on the opposite end of that spectrum, we have these huge golden copper metallic domes that also popped up right around the same time in the Dark Ages. In these places, they wanted to collect the electricity from the sky. They wanted to collect the ether itself and use the electricity that was ambient within the atmosphere and electrically charged. They wanted it to hit, so they would create these huge metallic domes. Domes attract electricity. Knobs, domes, rounded metallic objects, electricity, lightning is more likely to hit those than it is a rod at all. And the whole rod thing is why you see people fighting dragons with swords. You know what I mean? Like spears and swords and any type of thing like that. It's because they're fighting against a current of plasma. It's not an actual physical dragon. That would be a totally different kind of fight, okay? You'd have to get really lucky if you're actually fighting a phantazoid, which is what I call those. Otherworldly monsters like Leviathan and Behemoth, are some biblical examples of these, what I call phantazoids. That's not just an easy point your sword at it and it dies, okay? You can do that with electricity, though. If you have a buildup of electricity and you allow those positively charged energy to flow through you and out of your sword, then yes, it would dissipate the negative electrical buildup and charge in front of you, or the dragon, or however you want to say that. So that's architecture, half of it. The other half of it was protection, okay? So during many different periods in our past, not just the medieval times, but especially during the medieval times, there were monsters. There were otherworldly creatures that the legends say came from hell, came and rose from within the earth itself, came up out of caves and mountains and whatnot. Other times they described monsters actually falling from the heavens. But otherworldly creatures, otherworldly, what we would call today monsters, monstrosities, terrible and terrifying creatures, roamed the world much more than they do today. There was a huge influx of this. What happens is the electromagnetic barrier that separates the underworld from our world goes away during a neutral point in a polarity shift, which is what I believe causes these things to happen. When that electromagnetic barrier goes down, those otherworldly creatures, gigantic insects and animals and humanoids and giants and stuff, they can now come out. And the ones that will come out first are the ones that live closest to the entry points, which are, living down in the roof of the underworld below us, which are probably insectoid, is just my guess. That's where the locusts from the book of Revelation will come out of. But anyways, so in medieval times, they had monsters, okay? And so they built these huge fortified structures, castles. If they were tribal in nature, they would oftentimes build cliffs and stuff. But there's huge temples and complexes. People, built massive protective barriers. I also think that this is why they built the Great Wall of China as well, and why they kept adding to it during certain spans of history. Because they started building the Great Wall back in something like 700 BC. But then, man, they just kept on. There was sections of time when they're like, we need to finish this wall. We need to keep building the wall all the way up into the Dark Ages. All throughout the Dark Ages, they had a fervor to finish the Great Wall of China. And this is because there were monsters. There were unicorns. There were strange, weird creatures. There were giant bugs that people killed and experienced. There were giant snails that are pictured all over the place where people would, they were a nuisance. I'm sure they were a nuisance, just as bugs are a nuisance today. And they don't want their crops eaten by certain bugs or whatever. But these weren't any old bugs. These were bugs that were affected by gigantism coming up out of the hollow recesses of our world where everything grows to gigantic proportions. Huge monstrous creatures, right? Sometimes they're just cartoonified. Quite often, people draw them in different ways. You get chimera and mixtures of animal-human hybrids and things of that nature. Now, let's skip over from architecture to apocalyptic coins. Now, I did a whole video in my Plasma Apocalypse playlist recently, so I'm not going to touch on this one for too much, but during the entire Middle Ages, Dark Ages, you have really weird and anomalous imagery on coins. The last ones that I was showing showed things like the sky breaking open and there being an inverted dome up in the heavens with Yahweh's name on it, and huge lightning striking down at towns and cities. And even some coins showed waves of water from the ocean being pulled straight up into the sky. Not like a tidal wave, but like water just rising straight up and then the winds blowing it off. So there's also apocalyptic imagery in coins. There's also, as you see here, many different types of apocalyptic imagery in the artwork of the times that show the sky on fire. And they show, like, you know, I've also done this video about medieval and you know, artwork from the Dark Ages and stuff that shows like people getting sucked up into the heavens, floating up into the sky. You know, here's another one of a guy riding. Look at these weird trees, by the way. In a lot of these bestiaries where they show you that artwork, check out those giant asparagus trees. I just call them the asparagus trees. I don't know what they are. Maybe that's giant asparagus. I don't know. But we don't have trees like that I've ever seen, you know, in the modern world. They had all kinds of weird flora and fauna, strange plants, and things of that nature, as well as mutants. Case in point, right? And I've done individual videos about all these topics, okay? On my Ancient Oblivion playlist, my Plasma Apocalypse playlist, there were mutant humans. Not just random occurrences, like somebody, you know, we've heard of Siamese twins that happens on occasion here in the modern world. It actually happens much more than you might think. It's just that it's hidden from us on the news. They don't like to highlight these stories, but they had actual tribes, entire communities, islands full of completely mutated human beings. And they were all mutated in different ways, in different forms. And I'm sure that depended upon the different living conditions in the various regions where they came from. There was, for example, an entire region of dog-headed humans, actual humans that had what they looked like the face of a dog. They were hairy all over. These are medical conditions, as you see right there, where people can't stop growing hair all over their body, especially in places where we don't normally grow hair, like the underside of my arm or on my cheek or my forehead. That's a giant bug, by the way, right there. So they called them the dog-headed tribe. And there was wild women and wild men. I'm going to talk about this one in a minute. I got to stop looking at the pictures because I'll get distracted. Because I want to talk about all of it. I love all of it. Anyways, there's another good example too. Mutant legendary tribes of humanoid beings, right? Some seem to have extremely rubbery and stretchy skin. That some had ears that just stretched out and kept on growing. Some were missing certain body parts. Others had extra body parts. And these were not one-off occurrences. These were normal in the regions where these people came from. They were born that way, and they produced offspring that were like them, right? So you had the Blemmy, you had the headless tribe, people that looked like their head was in their chest, way down there, or possibly like super hunchbacked or something, I don't know. You had the Blemmies, you had the monopods, right? And I did a video where I talked about these mutants. Okay, we have monopods that are born today. Okay, they're born with it's a mutant condition. It's a mutation where your legs are fused together when you're born. You have one leg. It's just that they're both fused together, and sometimes your feet might be separated or not, but you look like a mermaid. And they actually call it mermaid syndrome. Oftentimes, these syndromes and these mutations are called a disease. They're really mutations. They're called a disease, and they're named after the mythic origin of where they come from. So mermaid syndrome, werewolf syndrome, all these types of things. But they were put on ancient maps. They were regarded and by ancient historians, some of which actually met them in person and came across these legendary tribes of mutant people. Just because they were mutants doesn't mean they were stupid or vile, or, I mean, sometimes they were. They're just people like us. But oftentimes they had their own versions of nobility, and they were treated with much respect whenever they came into their lands and stuff. There's many different travelogues from the medieval times that discuss these legendary tribes of mutated human beings. There's really good examples right there. And these are all actual viable medical circumstances that don't happen often in the world we live in, because we don't live in an energetically charged, amplified, atmospheric world where there's electricity just all over the place coming from the sky and up from the earth itself, right? Which also helped to explain why people were much more strict about their diets back then, right? Because your diet and how you change your DNA and stuff, that might not have a huge effect on us during a time where we're lacking energy and we sleep all day and we are consumers and we need to eat a bunch in order to, to get energy. But back during those times, they didn't need all that. They didn't need to sleep that much. They didn't need to eat that much in order to get all that energy. And whatever they put into their DNA, however they changed their body, from their diet to their physical regime, their exercise routines or whatever, it would have a very quickly happening effect on their DNA, which would change and adapt very quickly, causing mutations. So they were very careful, oftentimes, in different regions, about what they ate and what areas they would visit and what areas they would stay away from, right? Places of like radioactivity and stuff. Let's see what else. So we talked about the mutants. Oh, also we have how the energized atmosphere, it not only changed the architecture, but like I mentioned before, how people dress. So this whole knight in shining armor business had nothing to do. I'm convinced. It's so compelling to me. You know what that one reminds me of? Okay, time out. See that fish one the merman one? That reminds me of the movie A Cabin in the Woods. That one guy really wanted to see the merman kill the family or whatever, and at the end when they show the merman, it looked just like that guy. Anyways, let me get focused here. Oh, so the atmosphere, the electrically amplified atmosphere, also had an effect on how people dressed, because they wanted to protect themselves from getting zapped with electricity, especially if they're moving quickly along the countryside by horse or whatever, right? That builds up static electricity, and you can get zapped even easier as you build up a charge on your own body. You're basically begging to be zapped by cosmic thunderbolts at that point. So people would dress in Faraday cage fashion. I just made that up, okay? They wore lightning clothing, or lightning rod clothing, I should say. This was a fad as a fashion. Well, they say it was a fad in France. Only a couple of hundred years ago, actually, 200 or 300 years ago, they sold this. You can find the advertisements for lightning rod fashion clothing in France. That was all the rage at the time. People had umbrellas with little lightning rods on them. People had clothing with like little lightning rod hats and stuff, because the atmosphere was so electrically charged at the time. And that's just the last 100 years or so. That's just residual leftover energy. Imagine during the Dark Ages, when you had these pillars and beams of plasma shooting up terrestrially from the earth, and other, writhing, wonderful serpents that were writhing about through the air. This is where the knights in shining armor come from. They were not used for war. Okay? I'm never going to see that. Nobody can convince me as of right now, at this particular time I make this video, that knights, samurai, all those people, that they originally wore that armor to go to war against humans, fighting hundreds of people in that heavy armor that they had slits, sometimes look like cheese grater face and all this. Like, you can't see out of that. That's for exploring. That's for venturing into places that are electrically amplified and charged so that you don't get zapped. And there are historic records of this, myths and legends also, that point towards people. I talked about the Cycros cave, the cave of Zeus, where the people put on armor to go down into the cave of Zeus to collect the sacred honey from these bees. And the armor was not to protect them from Zeus, it was to protect them from bees, right? Which are actually not bees. They're little plasmoids that float about in electrically charged environments. They didn't want to get zapped, basically. So the amplified electrical atmosphere at the time of the medieval times and the Dark Ages changed people's entire social norms, from the way they dressed to the way they made their buildings. Also, they put it onto their animals. So some of these pictures have shown you armor on horses, and the horses have a little spike right here, a little metallic point, just like how the buildings do. That's because whenever you're on this horse in an electrically charged world and you're rushing through, you're building up all that static electricity, and you want the very front part of your horse to have a little lightning rod so that it doesn't get shocked and the horse doesn't buck you off and throw you off or get hurt or whatever, right? So that's not, they didn't do that for decoration. They definitely didn't do that so that the horse can stab somebody like a unicorn or whatever. They didn't try to make their horses look fancy or whatever. Now, it may have turned into that over time as the energy in the atmosphere dissipated and people very quickly developed amnesia and forgot about why they started these trends and these traditions and whatnot. And so they might have become decoration over time, right? This flooded into our modern military when even during World War I, people had spikes on their helmets and stuff, like metallic spikes. Why? Because it served a purpose. That's the simple answer. It served a purpose. And the purpose was to keep people from being electrified. That's also why they walked around with spears up in the air and stuff. It's not to fight with spears. I'm sure you could, you know what I mean? But it's not practical. What else? Oh, all right. So let's talk about dragon. Let's talk about the dragons, right? I actually want to break down the word dragon. You know, typically people think about like this scaly lizard looking thing that can talk, and there's the horse armor and stuff. But let's look at the word dragon. Now, right off the top, what I see is a suffix. The on at the end of dragon means of the, right? So at least in ancient Hebrew and Phoenician, it means of the. So of the drag. That letter G was also pronounced like our modern letter C. In the ancient world, they were interchangeable, so it's pronounced drak, or it's more of a guttural sound. So, of the drak, let me read what it says here. From Old French, dragon, and directly from the Latin, draconem, which is a nominative of Draco, Drago, right? It means huge serpent, dragon. From the Greek word drakon. This is also the root of Dracula, right? Draco. If you play fantasy role-playing games like I do, obviously, right? Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering and stuff. There are fantasy creatures called drakes. That's also the exact same thing. They're dragons. They are drax, draco, dragu, dragul, dracon, draconian, etc. They come from the word drak. Dracontos, serpent, giant sea fish sometimes. Now these had extensions over time and became different words. Apparently from the word drak, D-R-A-K, which means strong aorist stem of Durkestai, which means so it's connected to this word Durkestai, which means to see clearly, and that word is from the Proto-Indo-European root word derk, D-E-R-K, which I believe is directly related to Turk and the Turkish people and Turkey and things of that nature. Dirk, there's also a movie called Dirk 182 or something like that, from the 80s. Dirk means to see. So the source also of the Sanskrit word darsata, which means visible, and from the Old Irish ad kondark, which means I have seen. Gothic, it's also from the Gothic, or related to the Gothic word gatarjan, which means characterize, and from the Old English word tort, and Old High German zorakt, which means light and clear. Also related to the Albanian word dreit, which means light. These dragons in the sky were seen as watchers, seen as things that were just kind of there, occasionally interfering way down here on the surface world with us, but they usually stayed up in the atmosphere. Those also, and the terrestrial beams of energy too. But they were also seen as things that could see into other dimensions, see into other realms, look and see your aura. They had what I call aura vision, which is, portrayed in different ways. Like, the Predator, they kind of show like an aura vision. That's really more like, You know, the predator from the movie The Predator. The predator can see, you know, your heat signature and stuff like that. It's similar to that, actually, but it's more like they can read your aura. They can plasma sees in plasma form. It recognizes things that are similar to it, which are electromagnetic spectrums, right? So spirits can see your spirit. Basically, they would not see your physical body. They would see your electrical energy in and of your body, if that makes sense. It's aura vision. It's ghost vision. Anyway, so that's the root of the word dragon. Now, I want to discuss the end of the Dark Ages. Okay, the end after all of this stuff happened. All right, when it began, I don't know exactly. When it ended, I don't know exactly. But I do know, as somebody that reads omens and harbingers and signs of the earth, right? Signs, cosmic signs, local signs, little tiny signs and whatnot. I read these. I have my own little version of an intimate understanding of the signs of the things that I experience and learn of and see and study. So after the Dark Ages, there was a transition, right? If we had an influx of energy, terrestrial energy and cosmic energy, and that represented the Islamic Golden Age. That represented a time of magic and wizardry and sorcery and dragons and monsters and mutant tribes and amazing architecture and all this stuff. Then it stands to reason that once we went through another flip, an energetic flip, or a polarity shift, that we would experience the opposite of that. That we would see a decline in all of these things. We would see a decline in energy. And that energy is basically what we call magic. It would affect all walks of life, all things in life, as everything started to lose its energy. Sicknesses, plagues would be introduced immediately, basically. We would see a very quick and sudden change in architecture and styles of dress. We would see a change in all of these things. We would notice that people, that's in the Vatican, that one I just showed you. We would notice a change in people's character and their morality and their standards and how they talk and how they speak and treat one another. We would see and recognize these sudden changes in writing, even the direction of writing and what direction we write in, from left to right, from right to left, which I believe also happened. This is the introduction of what I like to call the season of Satan. Season going back to that word that means temporal, right? A specific time, a period of time, a stretch of time. The season of Satan, if during the Dark Ages, there were all of these saints, including Jesus, including his apostles, and all of these stories about these saintly people, these holy people, people that were drawn with halos and had a shine to them, sometimes being described as having what appears to be superpowers, right? All throughout the quote-unquote Dark Ages, right? The early 1st century as well, we have many examples of wizards and saints and holy people that seem to be empowered by some otherworldly force. They were immediately afterwards, once the energy retracted, once their source of power, which are these beams of energy, retracted and went down into the earth, they were hunted down by those who did not resonate with that energetic signature. Those who resonate more with what we typically refer to as the devil, a satanic energy, an energy that is in opposition to that which is good and wholesome and pure. And it brings about the ruling of that energy. That energy is the one that takes the charge of the earth, while the rest of it goes down into the heart of the earth to actually charge or recharge. So this brings about the season of Satan. So there's other things we should expect to see, like massive amounts of destruction as another cataclysm ensues. Plagues, for example, the bubonic plague, the black plague and whatnot. But we would also see a rise in just things that appear on the surface to just be evil to those of us that carry a signature from the tree of life. Those of us who are lost tribes from that tree. So we would see a rise in public torture, this is right around the time that we do. Strange, vile, maniacal, crazy forms of torture, inventions to torture people. Not just to torture them, but to torture specific people. The holy ones, the saints, the wizards and whatnot. People that seem to have extra long lifespans or strange superpowers and whatnot. People that probably couldn't feel pain in the way that others did. People that didn't have as much energy tend to feel pain a lot quicker and easier because they don't have cellular regeneration. If you have cellular regeneration that acts very quickly, then your body doesn't need to send that signal to say, hey, oh my God, emergency, will you cut yourself? Because it'll just heal up real quick. You know what I mean? So the pain would be lessened. Also, those gases that are released by the earth can also contribute to people feeling less pain. So in turn, many of these good and righteous people, light beings, however you want to see them, they were hunted down by those who had an evil energy signature. And that evil energy signature grew and multiplied and grew. And it led to the Inquisition. It led to witch trials. It led to the slaughtering of the quote-unquote saints and their torture. Oftentimes, just being tortured, they would laugh. They would laugh it off. They would joke with the people who were actually torturing them. And the reason they were torturing was twofold. One, it was to instill fear in those who were watching, the public. And the other was to get information on where the other people with superpowers were, or the other people with abilities, the other saints, the other wizards, or whatever you want to call them. So we do see a rise in that, right around the time of the end of the Dark Ages. Massive introduction afterwards of asylums, special prisons, jails used to contain not only the holy ones and wizards and powerful people, but their offspring, because they didn't want those kids to grow up and, eventually take control or whatever. So they indoctrinated them. They sent their parents off to insane asylum. They called them crazy. They just started introducing laws, which are just spells. And they built thousands upon thousands of crazy houses, insane asylums, immediately after this period of time. And they tortured these people in those places, legally, publicly. Everybody knew that if you went to a crazy house, that's it. You're going to be tortured. It's not going to be a fun experience. They're not there to care for you. They're not there to fluff your pillow. They're going to do vile and messed up things to you. Right? Which also created its own energy signature in those places, which gave rise to haunted houses, haunted asylums, and things like that. Because the earth records our emotions. It records our spirit and how our spirit responds to our experiences in life. There's also the influx at the exact same time, a sudden influx by the hundreds of thousands of orphans, just abandoned children, that we see during this time. All right, I'm kind of losing my voice now, so I think what I'm gonna do is jump into the chat. I'm gonna look for anyone that types in Jay, J-A-Y, or at JayDreamerZ. If you have a question or a comment, we'll take a few minutes, and I'll go ahead and read those live on the air right now. And I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. I do have some other videos I've got many videos. Videos about the Dark Ages, videos about the Plasma Apocalypse. This is all what I call ancient Oblivion. This is history that has been obliterated, which means in the old world, forgotten, okay? It's just like in the movie The Labyrinth, when Sarah falls into the oubliette. That's the same exact root word. Oublier, oubliette, obliterated, oblivion. It's all the same. All right, cool. Let me jump into the chat, see if anybody has any comments or questions. And if you do, I'm here. Oh, by the way, also go check out my website, JayDreamerZ.com. Lots of similar material, audio, visual examples. There's a community wall where my members post messages. You can post videos. It's like my own version of Facebook, except for it's for all these cool topics that I talk about. And I don't even want to compare it to Facebook. It's like way better, okay? It's not Facebook. It's my website. But anyways, there's a free trial, 24-hour trial. You could do a cram session, check it out. What else? My books, Ancient Oblivion, the series. So there's Ancient Oblivion, the Plasma Apocalypse, and Ancient Oblivion, Return to Hyperborea, which is the first book is the Cliff's Notes on these cyclical cataclysms, what to expect, what to look for, the signs, the things that happen. The second book is all about returning to the place of emergence, returning to paradise, physical, terrestrial, actual, tangible paradise on Earth that I believe is located at the North Pole. And I give many different reasons for that in that book. I basically make my case for paradise being at the North Pole, and so on and so forth. All right, I'm jumping in the chat, and I do see Danny D's in the chat and says The Crow would be a good truth in movies. That's a classic. I like The Crow. Let's see, anybody else? Oh, the Bog of Eternal Stench. Yes, in human ways. So that's all true too. So the Bog of Eternal Stench, that's, whenever we go through these cycles, our world is going to return to being a swampy place, a bog-like place, when we have worldwide earthquakes from the release of all of these gas and all the pressure inside the earth. It's going to cause the earth to shake up. The waters will rise. And with that, you'll have methane and stuff that will come up too. And this smells like rotten eggs and stuff. So that's the whole Bog of Eternal Stench symbolism. Let's see, we got Golden Child. What's up, Golden Child? Says, hey Jay, do you have videos or can you explain which cultures have a written history of the moon just appearing from nowhere? I can't remember off the top of my head. I do have a video called Before the Moon, which talks about the Pelasgians or the Plagarians and other pre-moon civilizations and stuff. So I highly recommend checking that out. But there was a time before the moon. The moon is just a luminary. It's just a light in the sky. That's also why it can be split in half and why it can act so weird and stuff. It's not a rock. It's not a physical object up there in the heavens. There is a physical source to the moon. I want to really emphasize that. It's a part of the firmament, and it's a physical part where the light passes through and it projects what we call the moon. So there is like a physical actual moon that's up there. It's way bigger than the little light that we see in the sky. But that moon, it comes and goes. Okay, we have the moon, which is a projection right now. When we go through this next polarity shift, before it happens, the moon will turn blue. And so will the sun. And then after that, the moon will disappear entirely for a short time. And then the sky will be way too full of fog and mist and stuff afterwards, because the sky is going to open next time. For sure. I mean, I think so. And that's gonna block out a lot of what we see as far as the luminaries and stuff. But once the fog clears out and everything, then we'll start to see differently. However, due to optics, everything up there in the heavens, all the luminaries, they'll be magnified. They'll look much closer and stuff. And we'll just repeat the same story over and over and over. So everything that we consider myth and fantasy and ancient history and forgotten about and stuff, that's all going to return. You who survive will relive those times. You'll relive legendary times similar to the ones we just spoke of in this video. All right, cool. Hey, good question, Golden Child. Thanks for being here. Frank the Tank says, read The Mystery of the Serpent. Okay, thank you. Mary Soul says, Jay, thank you for sharing this forgotten knowledge with us. I enjoyed this session. Seeing you makes my heart smile. That's nice. I like to hear that. CR User says, did you see Leave the World Behind? Oh yeah, I totally did. I actually did a whole breakdown, like probably 2 different breakdowns on that. You can see my Leave the World Behind movie breakdown on my Truth in Movies playlist. Good movie. Really good movie. Where does Christ fit into the plasma apocalypse? So Christ, for me, represents the light of the world, which it literally says that in the Bible. And it is the terrestrial energy, earth energy, good energy that rises up and creates these cruciforms and pillars and lights up in the sky. The major one being at the center of the world, where the seat of God is, Mount Meru, the plasma volcano, the throne, etc., and so on and so forth. Also, where Eden is as well. So that's how I see it. Okay. Let's see what else. I know people, it's okay. People want to know my religious views all the time. I don't have a religion. I don't like religion at all. I love it in that it's very useful when I study religious materials, but it's not the materials themselves that are religious. It's the people that are religious. The materials are just, it's just little puzzle pieces, little clues left behind. All right. What else we got here? I'm just gonna read the first ones I see. Let's see. What else? Oh, Michelle Trudeau says, I love what you do. Thank you. You explain your thoughts so clearly, and I love how you break everything down. Thank you. Have you heard of the Serious Sam video game? No, I haven't. Sounds cool. Lots of Phanazoids, I bet. Excuse me. Ama In says, Jay, do you know if something like the Vulcans exist in reality? Yes, very much. So if you're talking about the sci-fi Vulcans from Star Trek, definitely. They're the same thing as vampires. They're the same thing as various cartoonified races across time. But basically, that gets into the origin of the races, the different quote-unquote root races and stuff. There are those who come up from within the hollow recesses of our world. They're always traditionally described as being a certain color. There are those who survive and stay out towards the southern boundaries of our world. There are those who live in paradise, which is typically a mixed multitude at the center of the world, and they section off into their own little tribes. And then there are those who float down from above, which are typically described as what I call phantazoid white. Or like, alien, pale, pasty white. Those are more like the vampire, humanoid type races that come down from above. Sometimes also described as like the killer clowns from outer space and the whole clown symbolism and stuff from the Nephilim. Let's see what else. Atlantis is located center realm. Yep, I totally agree. What else? Where does Christ... I already read that one. Let's see. My chat is skipping a little bit, sorry. Angel in the Matrix says, JayDreamerZ, what do you think about the electric universe theory? Ooh, I love it. I'm on board. I mean, I'm on board with a lot. I've learned a lot from studying the electric universe, in particular the Thunderbolts project. Their video, Symbols of an Alien Sky, is really probably the main contributing factor to the plasma apocalypse theory that I've developed over time and really contributed to these things. They don't really, from what I've seen, they don't really discuss terrestrial plasma from Earth that much as much as they do, energetic discharges coming from other planets or whatever. But I feel like it would be really cool for me to see them, look into my theories of, or it don't have to be my theories, but just, terrestrial discharge from Earth, like the Earth actually creating these beams and pillars of light that shoot up into the sky. I often hear them talk about these cosmic formations and stuff, but they really put a focus of like space and stuff like that. But I don't really share that same cosmology of modern academics and space, but I do get a lot from the electric universe and I love it. I'd love to be a speaker at one of their, TED Talks or whatever. I don't know what they would think about my creative, flavor to what they contribute. Jake says, I think you'd like some music videos, Riders on the Storm. Oh yeah, that's right. I mean that whole song I know is all about plasma apocalypse stuff. Eric Dubé just did a good video about the Earth soul trap being shown via Star Trek. Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, there's a lot of truth in Star Trek and stuff. I saw you in the YouTube channel JWTV and followed you here, Santiago22. High five. Yep. I like JWTV. I've been on there a couple times. I'll have to see if I can get him on as a guest sometime too and return the favor. Michelle, hey, just gifted a JayDreamerZ membership. That was kind of you. Let's see who got it. Ginger Humphrey got it. Wait, was it? Yeah, it was Ginger Humphrey. Congratulations, Ginger Humphrey. Jay, did you see the 7 suns in China? I saw those 7 light pillars, if that's what you're talking about. Let's see. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. So, hey, thanks to everybody for your support. Do check out my books. I'm going to be making some additions, huge additions to my website here pretty soon, in offering like different services, selling different things. Here, let me show you a couple of different examples. So I'm making limited edition bookmarks to go along with my books. Hold on, let me just... I got my books right here. I have the green screen on, so I don't know if it'll show... Oh, it does. So that's my first book, Ancient Oblivion, the Plasma Apocalypse. This is Return to Hyperborea, right there. And this is the first bookmark I ever made, actually. I've got brand new ones that look totally different. But I've got these collectible JayDreamerZ bookmarks. That one has a quote on the back. I've also made stickers. I've got limited edition bookmarks. There will only be a certain amount of those that I will sell. I'll be offering, autographs. Pretty soon I'm going to do book signings. My goal is within the next month or two to figure out meetups. I know a lot of people over the years, have asked me if I'm ever going to do a meetup where people can meet me. I think an appropriate thing for that, I felt weird just having people just meet me, because I just see myself as me. I don't see me as, anything more than that. But now that I have my books, I can do book signings, and that can also be a form of meetup, and I can also give presentations in person and stuff. So all that stuff is in the works and on the way very soon. And I'm going to be posting that on my website. I'll give you guys an alert about that in my community section once it's all wrapped up and finished. I'm a perfectionist and an extreme Virgo, so I don't like to just do things half-ass. I like to wait till they're all ready to go and it's all perfect, and then something will go wrong, I'm sure. Anyways, I love you guys. Thanks for sticking around. Until next time, I'm JayDreamerZ saying good vibes and goodbye.